Hey, my name's Jess. I'm one of the Singer ambassadors, and today I'm going to show you how to turn a men's button-down shirt into a wrap shirt. It's such a fun and easy upcycle, and I'm going to be using my Singer Quantum Stylist for today's tutorial. So we're jumping right in. I'm going to start out by cutting this collar off right below that collar stand, neckband, whatever you want to call it. And now we have this beautiful neckline already. Next, I'm going to take my favorite tool ever invented, a seam ripper, and rip off these buttons. You can throw these away, you can keep them, but if we're talking sustainability, I would recommend keeping them. Okay, now I'm cutting off these little button bands. We do not need these. Okay, and the last thing I'm doing to prep this shirt is seam ripping off the little pocket on the chest. I am now putting it on my Singer adjustable dress form. Love this thing. And I'm just shaping how I want the neckline to look. So I'm just taking into account where the bust is, how low I want the neckline to be, how high I want it to be, and I'm just using pins to mark exactly where I want these. Okay, and the last thing I'm marking is where I want to hem this shirt at the bottom. So I'm marking mine at about the waistline. All right, where I pinned that neckline, I'm just gonna move those pins so that I can see all of the fabric, and I'm gonna add on 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's what I'm gonna sew everything at today. Once we have our lines drawn, we can go ahead and cut our new necklines. And I'm also making a straight line right there where I'm gonna hem the shirt and cut it. Okay, I'm putting it back on my dress form. This is the really fun part. This is gonna really get the size perfectly customized to your body. So I'm just taking it in the back here. You see all that floppy extra fabric? We don't need that. So I'm just marking with some pins how much I wanna take this in. Now, if you wanna do this the easy way, just sew all the way up. But if you wanna go the more professional looking route, I'm gonna make an opening here where the yoke attaches to the shirt. Now, that is called the yoke at the top there. Once I make that opening, I'm gonna take that extra fabric in and then connect the yoke back to the shirt. Now, if you're a visual learner, I'm gonna show you right now how to do that. So I'm taking my seam ripper and I'm ripping a little opening where the yoke attaches to the shirt, and I'm opening it about maybe 2 inches across. Now I'm gonna sew that slanted edge that I marked with my pins. This is gonna get our shirt nice and fitted. Okay, once that's sewn, I'm gonna take my scissors and cut off some of that extra fabric. You can barely see the seam line here, but it's roughly there. So I'm just cutting off some of that extra fabric. Like any good sewist, I'm gonna press my seams open. And now it's time to attach the yoke back to the shirt. So all I have to do is fold it over all nice and neat, put some pins in, and sew a little straight line right there. So simple. And now look at how beautiful this is. You can barely tell where I even sewed it. Okay, now it's time to make this neckline edge look nice and neat and professional. So you can either hem this, just fold it in and sew it down. That's the easy way. Or what I'm gonna do is make a little binding out of some scrap fabric that I have left over. So to do this, I'm gonna measure how long I need the binding to be. So it's gonna go around the entire neckline. Mine is 48 inches. And I'm gonna cut a slanted piece of fabric. Now, why is it slanted? Because what I'm doing here is basically making a bias binding. The bias runs 45 degrees or diagonal across your fabric, and it's the stretchiest part of the fabric, which is perfect for going around necklines. So now I have this strip of fabric, well actually 2, they're on top of each other. Once I sew it, I'm gonna have one big long binding that is stretchy and ready to go. I'm also gonna take the other part of scrap fabric that I have and make some waist ties out of this. Now, what I really need is one long waist tie that's about 100 inches long. But since that's not possible, I'm making 2 strips of fabric that are 50 inches long, and mine are about 3 inches wide. And I'm gonna place them right sides together, and I'm gonna sew them right here along the edge to make one big long waist tie. So now it's time to prep the bias binding and the waist tie. So my favorite way to prep these is by pressing them in half, and then I'm folding it in by 1/2 inch, and then in again by 1/2 inch, towards the wrong side of the fabric, and then I'm gonna fold that whole thing in half. This is how you make a bias binding. You can buy bias binding that's already made like this, or you can make your own. And I'm gonna prep the waist tie in a similar way. I'm gonna fold it in by 1/2 inch, and then in again by 1/2 inch, and then I'm gonna fold the whole thing in half, hot dog style. Here we go. Now it's time to attach that bias binding. So what I'm gonna do is start at the back of the neckline, and I'm gonna lay the bias binding down right sides together. And basically, I'm just gonna pin it all around the center front necklines. Once I get to the end, I can cut off whatever extra fabric I have. I always like to have a little extra. And I'm just gonna sew it right along that pinned edge, all the way around. And since this is a neckline that is gonna be stretched, what I like to do is cut little tiny triangles into the seam allowance. So do not go past that seam allowance, but I'm just cutting like 5 little triangles along the curviest part of the neckline. And this is gonna help relieve some of the tension in the neckline and let it stretch a little more. Okay, so now I'm turning my shirt inside out, and I'm gonna bring that binding over to the other side of the raw edge and just pin it down. So basically we're just concealing that raw edge with a binding, hence why it's called a bias binding. And then we're just gonna sew all along that pinned edge, and this is gonna complete our binding. All right, it's time to attach the waist tie. So I'm gonna let one of the sides of the waist tie hang out by about 35 inches. What I mean by that is one of the waist ties needs to be longer to go around your body. So I'm gonna attach that to the left side, and I'm pinning the waist tie right sides together against my shirt. And if you notice, the other side is gonna hang out by about 21 inches, not as long as the other tie. Now I'm just sewing the waist tie to my shirt, and just like we did for the bias binding, we're just gonna fold that waist tie up to conceal the bottom of the shirt and pin it down. I'm also gonna pin the ties closed at this point. I'm just gonna sew it all together in one go. That's the easiest way to do it. When I get to the waist tie, I'm gonna close the end in by about 1/2 inch and then close it all up. And now our tie is nice and neat and closed. Okay, so I'm just gonna sew all along the waist tie, all down the bottom of the shirt, and the other side of the waist tie. Okay, our very last step is the sleeves. Now I'm gonna start off by cutting about 6 inches off. Spoiler, I kind of wish I would have left these a little bit longer, so maybe don't cut off 6 inches when you go to do this. And I'm just doing a simple double fold hem, so I'm just folding it up twice by about 1/2 inch and pinning it down. I'm just hemming my sleeve all around, and the most important thing to remember here is to leave a little opening. I left about 1 inch opening here in my hem. This is where we're gonna slide the elastic in right now. So I'm just measuring my wrist with this elastic. I'm gonna attach a safety pin onto the end, and this is what we're gonna use to feed it through. So I'm just gonna feed this elastic through my little sleeve hem. Once I get it all the way through, I'm gonna overlap the elastic by about 1 inch and zigzag stitch that little baby down. A zigzag stitch is great for anything stretchy like elastic, and I just went back and forth a bunch of times, and this gave us a nice, stretchy, secure seam. Okay, now we can just pop the elastic inside the sleeve, and the last thing we have to do here is close up that little opening. So I'm just going back to a straight stitch and closing up the opening in our sleeve. And now we're done. I love, love, love how this turned out. It can be dressed up, it can be dressed down. The binding along the neckline looks great. I do wish I would have left the sleeves a little bit longer, but you live and you learn. And the back looks great. You can hardly even notice that seam there. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you get a chance to make this at home. Feel free to follow along with my Instagram and YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye!